He who wants to be first of all will be last of all and servant of all. Gentlemen, you are in the right place. This is Last in Line Leadership Podcast. I am your host, John Shibley, and I just read you from Mark 9:35. That scripture is all about servant leadership, and that's what we're about here. The podcast that showcases and highlights great leaders of faith, people who have walked the journey of leadership, who have served, who have sacrificed, who have developed discipline, courage, and resilience. You've come to the right place. This is Last in Line Leadership. Hey, I'd like to welcome to Last in Line podcast, Mr. Javier Labrador, who he and his wife Shannan started a company called 24/7 Marriage, which is an organization committed to restoring marriages. They created what's called the Marriage Lab, which is their 38-foot mobile marriage support fifth wheel. And they tour the country working with and supporting couples. They've got what's called marriage boot camps. They are all about restoring hope, redeeming stories, and building stronger marriages. This is a very unique kind of travel life support for marriages throughout the country. Javier and his wife really have committed to restoring what has been known to be the marriage crisis amongst our nation and the breaking of American and nuclear families. And so they got a cool story. They've got a cool ministry. Javier is by trade a pastor and really kind of broke off into this marriage laboratory with he and his wife and created 24/7 Marriage 13 years ago. And so this is a blessing to get to know him. I've seen his work on Instagram, obviously, and to hear his heart behind what is really plaguing a lot of marriages and hear his story with his own marriage and how they were redeemed and recovered and how they consistently work on it daily and help others do the same. So I think it's a unique story. I think it's a unique ministry, and I love his heart behind it. So I hope you're blessed by the show today with Javier Labrador. Welcome him to Last in Line podcast. Man, Javier Labrador, welcome to Last in Line podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Man, it's cool work that you do in what you and your wife do and traveling around doing marriage boot camps, and you've been doing this for 13 years as a whole, right? But the last 3 you've been traveling around. Yeah, travel trail. I mean, it's kind of cool. I'm kind of jealous that you get to travel around but you and I just met like 5 seconds ago and come to find out you actually live. Your home base is about an hour from where I am, which I never realized. So small world, but glad you could be here, man.
Yeah, no, glad. Hey, thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be on with you for sure.
Well, we're going to talk about marriage, and we're going to, classes in session, gentlemen, because we're going to get better today as husbands. Yeah. And
a lot of guys cringe right now when you said we're talking about marriage.
No, because we got the expert right here. Javier is going to talk to us about how we can serve our wives, how we can get better. But before we do that, and before we go deep into your background, Javier, I do something kind of unique that I call a life sentence. And I'm gonna create a sentence for you, and you're gonna finish it from your perspective. Okay, so you finish the sentence here. It's not too heavy, so disarm the situation, relax, we're good.
Right.
All right, how about this? My marriage has grown most in the area of
truly serving one another. That's what it's been for us, is how do we die to self, and how do we serve one another and do that with the joy that we get to serve one another, and operating from that mindset. So it has grown because we've learned how to serve one another.
Yeah, I noticed on your website it talks about get to instead of have to, and I want to dive more into that.
Yes.
So, all right, how about this one? That was too easy, man. I should have come up with some harder ones here. What about this? How about the most common struggle in the couples we work with is?
I would say it's pride and a lack of being able to come into the space of the other of your spouse to seek to understand where they're at. And so we see that as a consistent thread that kind of weaves through, couples that we connect with, that we work with, what we've seen in all the work that we do. I think those are the two things that we consistently see. Again, there's probably others, but those are two main ones we see often.
Yeah. And by the way, I went on and purchased your little guide to communication yesterday.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there's a lot
Great.
of resources that I want you to get us into at the end before I let you go, so that
Sure, sure.
the guys can get some of those. No,
Yeah.
that's a great answer. Because I mean, I think the antithesis of serving is pride. So
Yeah.
if we can get the opposite of that and be more humble servants, I think that the marriage can only grow from that. All right, here we go.
That's
You're
it.
doing too good so far. I got to see you. We gotta prove you're human here, man. All right. The most powerful lesson I can teach my kids about marriage is,
Okay, now
and you
you
can't,
got
okay, and I gotta
so,
qualify this
so
first.
I would say
You can't
this.
use the first two that you said already.
So I would say for them is the understanding how they live out, so that they live out the true purpose of marriage. And when I say that is, marriage is not meant, right, for our happiness. It's not meant that, hey, she's sexy, so I'm going to marry her because sexiness is going to fade, right? Gravity takes a hold. Like, the purpose of our marriage is God. And so if I instill that into my children, and especially for me, I have two girls. So I've got young men, one's married and the other one's dating somebody seriously. And I care more about that those men love God first,
Yeah,
on their knees before God, because I know they're going to love their wives well. And if they make God the purpose of their marriage, then that will be greater than anything they will ever face. So that's what I've passed down. That's what I've instilled into them.
it's really good, man. And I so you made me just think about my own little motto with my kids is the best gift I can give them is to show them that I love their mother well.
Good.
And
That's good.
that all comes after they already know how much we love God first.
That's
And
right.
they all know the hierarchy. They all know it's God, their mom, and then them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the way it should
Well,
be.
and John, one day they're going to be gone. And there
Yeah,
you stand with your wife,
that's right.
right? And there's too many that have placed kids before that, or other things in front of that. But
Yeah.
when you make, right, the only priority you have in life is God, and then everything else falls in the proper order after that. And so, yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, because that is exactly what they need to see. And they need to see sometimes the difficulty, the struggle,
That's
where we
right.
make, right? They need to see all that because it's real. And we're not going to be this veneer that, hey, it's all up and to the right. It is not like that.
That's
You
right.
guys, you men listening to this, you know that very well. But when you can teach them how to love, right, their spouse well, and how to image
Mhm.
Christ in their marriage, that has a generational impact.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. We're going to dive in. I'm getting excited. We're going to dive into
Yeah.
some of this and peel back the layers on some of this. All right. Last one here. My favorite thing about my wife is,
I love how she never questions who she is. So that her strength, her resiliency, and she's got an edge and attitude about her that I love, right? It was the very thing that was difficult in the first 5 years of our marriage that almost ended our marriage, but it is the very thing that I love about her, right? And so she just has a strength about her, and really an identity of knowing, hey, this is who I am. So I love that about her, and that's impacted me. She's made me a better man because of that, for sure.
that's good, man. Yeah, my wife and I are both only children, and we were both very type A, assertive personalities. And you can only imagine the
Oh
sparks
yeah.
that flew the first 5 years. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Imagine.
5 years. Um, all right. So I notice you're wearing, if I can see, I could see part of it, but Black Rifle coffee shirt. Is that what you're wearing?
Oh, this one is
I
this one's
can't
Black
see that. I
Rifle.
saw
Yeah,
rifle. There you go. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Shout out to Black Rifle Coffee. Love those guys.
There you go.
Um, okay. So I want you to maybe go into your background a little bit, just because I'm assuming you weren't coming out of the womb as a marriage therapist or conducting marriage seminars.
No.
So let's talk about you, by trade, kind of what you became after, after your adolescent years, and give us maybe a glimpse of your defining faith moment. when it comes to your faith journey?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just give you a high level. So I was, being of Hispanic heritage, raised Catholic. My dad came to the Lord, and then was, he came to Christ and converted from Catholicism to Christianity. And I was pretty much raised in the church. And my dad helped plant the church early on. So I was in church serving in that arena ever since about the age of 10 and on. So fast forward, I felt this desire to want to work within ministry, and that's what I was doing, even at a young age. And so I became a junior high, then a high school pastor, went to Bible college, came out of that, and moved from junior high school into being an associate pastor. And then years after that, planted our first church. And when we planted that church, as a pastor, our very first Sunday was in the very church that I helped my dad begin with another pastor on that platform. So full circle, a platform that I helped build was the very one that I stood upon when we planted our church and had our very first service.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so kind of progressed from there. We had our church. We actually merged our church with a larger one. It didn't go well after a season. Unfortunately, we had to leave that. And that sent me through a season where I hit a period of burnout. I had hit a wall. It revealed what was going on in my life, that I had actually walked away a little bit from my first love. I was doing all the right things. I was loving people, serving. I was serving in the church. I was leading a church, but I was not really in love with my first love. Right. I had allowed other things to get in the way. And God took me on this journey to bring me to a place where I could say, God, you are enough. That nothing, if I never stood on that platform again, if I've never was in ministry again, or I never worked with couples again, God, you are enough. Full stop. And
Mm.
so that journey was a difficult journey, but and through that, that was what birthed a lot of the marriage ministry and what we are doing now. My background, again, Bible college, background in psychology, but my focus now when we work with our couples and our team, they do a lot more coaching, and then we work with therapists. And the only reason why is coaching is very forward moving, and so we focus a lot in that area with couples. That being said, so we launched the marriage ministry, and God has blessed it. It has grown significantly. We have grown in impact and influence. So everything that we are doing is also birthed not just from experience in schooling, but it's birthed out of where we have been. And I think that's the greatest education, right? What we have actually navigated in and through our marriage, especially our first 5 years, that we talk about it all the time at every conference, at every boot camp, every workshop that we speak at. We talk about our first 5 because they're incredibly difficult. And it may sound like, hey, Javier, you're the saint, but how the story unfolds when we tell it is that a lot of this was birthed out of a place my wife was at, where she was like, ain't nobody going to tell me what to do, where to go. I'm going to have my voice. I won't lose my voice. And that came from her out of childhood trauma, out of having a
Mm.
baby at the age of 15 and setting
Hmm.
up for an abortion and missing that appointment because she didn't have enough money. And by the grace of God, ended up in the pregnancy center. And then having this child. And then Carrie, who was a child, was born, and she was adopted within the family, within my wife's family. Now, during this time, I had already known my wife. We had dated, then we were broke up. And then that happened while we were in between, right? When we broke up and before we got together again. And so I had been part of Carrie's life as well since the day she was born. So she was
Wow.
adopted within the family, and now they both minister and do things together. But I officiated her wedding, or my girls were in the wedding. My wife was her maid of honor. So full story of restoration. But for her, our first 5 years were impacted by where she had come from, being in the hospital bed and laying there and recognizing that she wanted to see her baby one last time, but she felt she had no voice. She couldn't speak up. She couldn't say anything
Hmm.
because it's already in motion. And even though it was going to be family and she would see her, she felt, I've lost my voice. I've lost my ability to be able to stand up for myself. And thus that carried into the early years of our marriage,
Hmm.
where I am not going to lose my voice. I will speak up for who I am, and no one's going to dictate anything in my life. And so you can imagine what that did for me in our first number of years of marriage.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of a high level, of really a nutshell of kind of like where we've been and what has led us to doing a lot of the work that we're doing now with couples, that we can sit with them and have these conversations, but also minister at the level we are and say, hey, me too. We get it. We've been
Yeah.
there. We've walked this
Yeah.
out.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's good groundwork. I appreciate that story because I mean that does shine some light on where you've come from and some of the water you had to navigate. as a couple, and
Yep.
now why you're doing what you're doing, because I'm assuming that you have a heart for people that are going through similar stuff. And let's face it, the marriage covenant, man, the enemy would love nothing more than to break up a happy home, right? And
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
divide what God has joined together.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think this is crucial monumental work y'all are doing. And I've talked to some other people who do similar work, and man, there can't be enough people, I don't think, doing what you're
Right.
doing. So I appreciate what you guys. Um,
Right.
so are you both just deriving from your own experiences, or is one of you a more gifted writer, a more gifted speaker? Like you guys kind of gel well off of each other when you're teaching together? Like talk to me a little bit
Well,
about
he's
that.
he's not here, so I could say, yeah, I'm the gifted one, 100%, right?
I
No,
can
I would
tell
say
she's not shy though from what I see on Instagram. Like
she is
she's a
not. No,
speaker.
she is definitely the on-camera personality. Like that is her. That's where she shines, right? That's not my gifting there. Um, but how we break things up. So when we do events, when we speak, oftentimes it is together at our boot camps where we're both speaking. We do sessions for men and women. I'm a lot of the content creation, resource creation. I write the book that we're finishing up. I wrote. She wrote part of it as well. The speaking, she would say that's 100% Javier. Like I love to be able to communicate and to speak. She absolutely does that as well. She does a lot of the creative, a lot of, even content creation when it comes to social media. And then we have our assistant and four others that are part of the team that help with other aspects of the ministry. But we really are as a team when we work and when we do this. And the reason why is like when we're working with couples, and we don't do a lot of coaching individually anymore because we just can't scale that, but we got a team of coaches. But when we're ministering, the ability to be able to have that perspective, right, from both, right, from the husband, from the wife, and for us to be able to sit and hear and to listen and have those conversations, I think it's been very impactful.
Yeah.
So we both are heavily involved, right, within the ministry. She does sometimes call me the talent. She says, "You come in, you speak, and you blow out," and she ends up doing a lot of the back end work, her and the others. So I'm guilty of that for sure. But we definitely have a relationship where we are both mutually submitted to God, mutually submitted to one another, and we walk it out really well. And is it easy? 100% no. My wife and I, we're together 24/7. Not only that, but we're traveling the country right now in a 38-foot fifth wheel called the Marriage Lab. So we live in 38 feet together consistently. We're away from friends, families, and all and everything that we know. And
Mhm.
so it provides a whole different set of challenges. But
Yeah.
we've done that most of our lives, most of our working lives. And so for us, we have found this healthy rhythm on how to do that well with one another.
Yeah, man. No, that's good. And I can tell you do have, I mean, you're a pastor, so you do have that speaking gift, and very well articulate. I, we'll get to the book too. Don't let me forget to find out where,
For
if the
sure.
book, when the book's coming out, the name and all
Yeah.
that. But so give me an idea. I know she's not there, but as much as you're together, you could probably speak pretty well educated, speak for her. But what does she admire most about the husband that you kind of became from those first 5 years to where you are now? What would you say she would say to that?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I had to understand, I had to work on is this ability to be able to see past the problem and see the person. And I think that's actually empathy, right? The ability
Yeah.
to not just be able to have compassion for somebody and say, "Hey, I see what you're feeling or what you're going through. Hey, I'm here for you. Let me pray for you." But the empathy to actually crawl down into that dark place, into that ditch with them and sit right behind them or next to them, and to carry that weight, to carry that burden with them. For me, it was having that empathy to look past what was actually happening and taking place. And she would say this, that I was able to see past those things, to see there's my wife here, she is hurting. There's something taking place that is causing what is actually happening in our marriage right now. Right. We always tell couples that you don't have a marital issue. You have a you problem and a you problem happening in your marriage. Right. So you got two individuals coming together. And, I brought baggage into
Yeah.
my marriage. Some people have a carry-on, some people back up a U-Haul, right?
Hmm.
She had a carry-on, but her carry-on had explosives in it. Right. So, but I had to learn how to actually come alongside and see what was truly going on and not just what was happening to me. And it was difficult because I had to be able to work through not wanting to shift and make things better so they were better for me. I had to come into her place of brokenness to love her in such a way to help her walk through that, but also bring other people into that early on in our marriage that would journey with her, that would speak truth in her life that I honestly couldn't do because
Hmm.
I'm not a woman, and she needed that a strong woman speaking into her life. And so I think for me it was that place to be able to have empathy and to understand, like, hey, something's going on here with my wife. What is that? How do I love her through that? Because as our model in our ministry goes, no, I didn't have to. I didn't have to fight with her through that. I didn't have to come alongside her. I didn't have to endure 5 years that were difficult. When she would belittle me in public and she would argue and she yell. I didn't have to, but I got to. Right? I got to do that with her, and that's what we say. You don't have to, you get to. And it was a paradigm shift to say I get to walk with her through this, even though it's difficult for me in this season. But what God did through that, and the beauty of that, and the healing and the restoration, the strength of a marriage birthed out of adversity and difficulty, is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Sadly, most guys won't go through that. I
Yeah.
talk to guy after guy after guy after man after man who will not stand and say, "Well, this is happening to me, but she is not doing it." But she, like, I don't care about her.
Right.
Like you work on you, and what are you called to do? You're called to love her as Christ loved the church. And what did he do? He
Yeah.
gave us the church.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are some situations that we have worked with couples that are, extreme situations of what may be going on with the other spouse. But in most cases, I think with men, we quit. We
Hmm.
get frustrated what's happening to us, and we back down and we run from Goliath instead of running towards it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We stand on
Yeah.
the other side of that wall in, not knowing if we have what it takes, or, trying to control the situation, and they're just waiting for us to move towards them, and we don't.
Yeah.
Right? And all we're doing at that point is reinforcing the narrative that's been told in their mind, by the enemy or by those that are around them of, hey, you're not worth fighting for. You're
Yeah.
not worth doing. And
Well,
that's what they're hearing.
so in your situation, and her being a strong personality because of some of the trauma that she had in her past, she was not going to repeat that. She was going to be more of a voice, more of a assertive personality.
Yeah.
How did that, and even applicable to some of the people you work with, because I would imagine that's not an isolated incident. I would imagine you see a lot of that where there's sort of a leadership battle, like who's going to lead the home, right? There's going to be
Yep.
kind of somebody that's strong here, somebody that's strong here. One thinks they're the leader, one wants to be. So what did you do in your situation to be the spiritual leader of the home? Because obviously the Bible talks about that, right? And the Bible says,
Yeah.
the wife submit to the husband, and husband, love her like Christ loved the church. But how did you get through some of that where you were empathetic, but sort of still stood your ground as the leader biblically of the home? And what are you saying to the people that you see that are similar situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're listening to this, just remember this word. I would just tell her frequently and often, submit. That was it. I'm kidding.
That's great, man.
I would just yell,
That's
submit,
great.
woman. And that was it. She
I
was in line.
mean,
Everything was
just
great.
highlight
Right.
that word in her Bible on that verse, and that's it.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
it. I just left it open on her bed every day. That was it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no, 100% no. What's funny is we'll actually do that now, like at supermarkets, walking down an aisleway just to get laughs and see what people do. I'll yell, "Hey, woman, submit, get over here," and like she'll laugh. People around us will be like, "What just happened?" Like,
Right. You
they
get a
gotta have fun.
difference. Hey, you get a different response in like Bath and Body Works as you do in Home Depot, I bet.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So you gotta have fun in marriage, but um. It wasn't about me having, and this is what sometimes we think, right, as men, that I have to verbally say these things, right? I have to verbally, like, say, hey, we're not going to be going this direction. Like, this is what scripture says. Like, I didn't do any of that. What I did is I lived out the mandate that God had called me to lead my wife. And leadership and leading in my home and leading my wife was about leading her spiritually and setting the example of what it meant to image Christ to her in our marriage, to be on my knees in prayer, to pray together, which was difficult
Mhm.
for me early on. All those pieces were showing leadership. And I just kept pushing into those things, right? And even when she was resistant, I would keep pushing into those things. And it wasn't a verbal like, hey, scripture says you're called to submit, right? I'm called as the leader. She already knew that. Like, John, she already knew that. She knew scripture.
Yeah.
She was well aware of that. But she had made that inner vow that no one's going to do this to me. No one's going to control me or silence my voice. So I recognized that, and I had to lead by my actions, how I pursued her, how I loved her, how I served her, and even the moments when I didn't do it perfectly, how I came to her and say, you know what? I didn't speak to you the right way. You know, hey, I didn't respond in the right way. Whatever it may be, to own that. That was leadership. And I was imaging that to her, that she could trust my leadership. And that was a big thing, right? Like she was felt she'd lose her voice, so she had to trust me. And it wasn't going to be by me telling her. It had to be by me living and walking it out. And again, I make it sound like it was easy. It was not easy. It was day in, day out. It was times I wanted to quit, like times I was just done. But with men around me to hold my arms up and lock arms with, that helped sustain me. But I had to just walk it out. I had to live it out. And just this
Mm-hmm.
idea that like, God didn't give us a marriage because, we are able, but because he is able.
Yeah.
And so I had to rely on, in my weakness, I had to be dependent upon him. And that moved me to that dependence upon him. And like, how do I do this? I don't know. So no, I didn't do it perfectly, but I walked it out, I think, by my actions.
Yeah.
And that's a display of leadership right
And
there.
that's good too. And it makes me think of the movie Fireproof. And, I know that guy, the Love Dare book kind of became sort of commercialized, but at its roots, it really is servant leadership, regardless
Yeah.
of the response, right? Regardless of the outcome, is you're doing it out of love and out of obedience, not out of reception from the audience, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's really key is guys do things because we are a if this, then this. Like we're a cause and
Yeah.
effect species, right? Like if I do this, then there ought to be something in return for that. So it's counterintuitive, I think, for some guys to just serve and lead that way without
Yeah.
anything in return. So that is good, man. That will get their attention because their first need is security, right? And if
Yes.
they're secure and they can trust that, then they're more likely to sort of say, okay, yeah, dude, you are the leader. Be the leader. I don't want to be the leader,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and most of our wives that's what they're looking for, John. Like they want us to step up and lead. They
mhm.
desire for someone to like,
Yeah.
hey, yeah, security, absolutely. But they are asking, begging, right, for a hero in that story, right? If it's
Yep.
not you, then who is it going to be? And they are asking for our leadership. Now, Shannon pushed against it, but in reality, that was the cry for me to be strong and to lead her, but
Yeah.
not with a domineering hand or spirit, but to lovingly display what that looked like. But the problem is like, and listen, a lot of men who they didn't have an example of what it meant to lead in their homes. They
Yep.
don't know what that looks like practically. They hear it in church. They're like, I don't know what that means. Lead in my
Hmm.
home. Like, what does that even look like? That is a common question we get at every marriage boot camp when I sit with the guys. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that means. And I hear you. I get it. And so we try to walk that out with guys and help, hopefully give a picture of what it looks like to lead within their homes.
Yeah.
But even in like not knowing, we want you to know that your wives are asking for that. They're looking for that leadership.
Yeah. Just like kids. I mean, Henry Cloud wrote a book, Boundaries in Parenting, and it talks about kids will resist boundaries, but really they want them
Sure.
and they need
Yeah.
them. And
Yep.
it's for their own good, honestly.
Yep.
And so
Absolutely.
they're people are crying out for a leader, and it's just how you lead is how that's going to be received. All right. Well, so when you guys talk about boot camp, maybe give me an idea, just because I see the term marriage flippers that you guys have on your website, because you're really restoring, right? Just like on
Yep.
television, like
Yep.
you're
That's it.
renovating, you're restoring, you're
That's
kind
it.
of coming in, redeeming certain situations. So,
Right.
well, Christ is redeeming it. You're preparing
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
fields for that. But talk to me about marriage flippers and marriage boot camp a little bit.
Yeah, the marriage flippers came out. My actually wife came out with that just simply for the fact that that's what's happening, right? Talk about what we're doing is we're restoring hope, redeeming stories, and building strong marriages, right? And so everybody loves a good makeover story, right? A good
Yeah,
home
yeah,
renovation, whatever it is. And you think about what has to happen at times. You got to go to the foundation, right? You got to retrofit. You got to maybe tear it out,
yeah,
build again. You got to build a structure that's solid. You got to build walls around it that are going to stand the test of time. You got to put in the right electrical and plumbing, like all these things to be built for this to be a place where, like, man, I feel safe here. I feel it's good, it's solid. So this idea that at times, like, we have to do that within our marriage, it's either refreshing, it's a rebuilding, it's a complete, we tell people like, hey, same person, new marriage. Because there's times where there's a complete renovation, right? We have been so disconnected, off track. We have come to the end of the time with our kids here in the house and we don't even know one another. Like, we have literally lost connection. What
hmm
do you got to do? You've got to completely renovate, right? Like, it's getting back to know each other. It's rebuilding the foundation of things that you haven't done. And so marriage flippers kind of came out of that we help flip marriages, like to
yeah,
take them from a place of hopefully brokenness, of cracks in the foundation to hopefully restoration, and to redeem the story that God has planned and intended for them. And for us in our marriage boot camps, it's one of the things that we love doing. So last year we did 7. This year we'll do 7 again. We'll do 6 boot camps and we'll do 1 boot camp advanced. And the boot camps are are done in such a way that they're a Friday through a Sunday intensive. And the reason we do them this way is it gives us an opportunity to really dig in with the couples. Our team that comes in gets to work with the couples. It's not your typical retreat. It is not, we're going to pass the lifesavers with a toothpick back and forth to each other. And no, we're not doing any of that stuff. Like, you're going to be working in and on your marriage. You're going to be going out, working on stuff together in your marriage, doing activities together. The sessions that we have, and we do them very small. Intentionally, we do our boot camps 10 to 11 couples max. And the reason why is because then we can actually be able to go in deep with them, and be present with them. And so we could go big, and because we have wait lists, but we keep them small and intentional for that reason. And we do them in environments where it's conducive for the couples to feel like, hey, this is a healthy place for me to be, safe to share, because we do them on property with acreage, usually water, land, and an environment where they can actually disconnect and then reconnect with one another. So they're intensives for sure, but they have proved to be one of the biggest catalysts that we have seen for couples. I mean, we have literally seen divorce papers being torn up at boot camps. We have seen marriages just healed and restored in incredible ways, and not because of anything that we've done, but simply because you have people who show up. And our boot camps are intentionally about, and we tell them that you think you're coming here, that's just about your marriage. It's not. Like, God needs to do a work in you and in you. And it's probably as individuals. And what's going to happen is it's going to impact your marriage 100%. So
yeah,
don't make it about what you need your spouse to get this weekend to make things better for you. Like I said
yeah,
earlier, what
yeah.
you hope to hear, then you will miss what God has for you.
Yeah.
Um,
So are you getting
I
mostly
can keep talking,
Christian?
man. You got to shut me
No,
up.
no,
I will keep
I just don't want to. I'm a little older than you, so I don't want to forget my question. But no, I love what
Oh,
you're
you're
saying.
older than me. I highly doubt it, John.
How old do you think I am?
Oh, you're maybe 38, 40.
Okay, no more talking to you. You're trying to get top billing here of all my guests. I am 51 years old. Um,
Wow. So you barely beat me, brother. So next month I'm 51.
Good man. Well, we live close and we're virtually the same age. This could be a friendship in the making. All right, so I do have um, mostly Christian couples, I would assume, because they know your framework is based on biblical foundation. Is that a correct assumption that most of them are Christian?
Yeah, so our boot camps are faith-based.
Yeah, right.
Um,
But
but
most
our
of your
content
people that come,
for them, yeah, because if it's faith-based, pretty much everybody that comes, it's all
I would
faith-based.
assume. Okay.
Yeah,
So that,
we don't shy back from that. But because of what we do on social media and all that, like, yeah, we have people who aren't right, who
yeah.
follow, but
No, yeah.
we don't shy away from any of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So in all those, I just wanted to get an idea of who I'm thinking of when I think of your groups and boot camps. So everybody is sort of bought into the biblical foundation, but the proof is that even Christian couples have problems, right? And people are people. People are broken. People are flawed. I do when people bring stuff into marriage, like you said, or maybe there's a thing that happens in the marriage. and there's guilt and there's shame and there's unforgiveness. Man, what is sort of your breakthrough moment, or do you have kind of a template delivery that you have for those couples where they see a breakthrough on forgiveness or redemption over that guilt or shame? Because I imagine your wife even had some guilt uh, about her early life, and I bet she had to kind of overcome some of that, and then brought some of that guilt into marriage. What do you do with couples that do have, maybe there was an offense, a huge one, maybe there's some shame, maybe there's some unforgiveness? Is there something you kind of laser focus in to address that?
Yeah, so I understand you correctly in terms of like how they begin to kind of remove that, maybe that shame they're
Yep.
carrying with
Yeah.
that kind of weight they're carrying. Yeah. So I would start with this is that there's nothing the other spouse can do, right? We like
Yeah.
to say that there's a lot they can do. But the thing is that we know like we can't change the other person, but ultimately, like what can you do, right? As a spouse of somebody who's kind of experiencing that. I think it goes back to the empathy piece again, but coming
Yeah.
alongside and asking, hey, how do I best serve you in this season? How do I come alongside you in this moment? And understanding where they're at, kind of where some of the hats come from. Because for the spouse who's supporting in that or trying to understand, you have to hold that whole Stephen Covey principle, right? Seek first to understand and then be understood. So you got to understand where your spouse is at and how do you help them walk through that. For that person who's been carrying, whether it's that shame, whatever it may be, I wouldn't say there's anything that we do that is this quick, like, release of that. I think that it's this understanding of who they are, this understanding of where that could be rooted from. And I think when they begin to shift their identity and have a knowledge of like, no, that is under grace and that is forgiven. So I would say one of the big things that we talk about, even at the boot camps, that it's part of our minimalist marriage that we call, is this place of having grace, right, for your spouse. And I think once a person who's navigating, whether it's shame or guilt, understands the grace that we have been given, and we hear it in church and we hear it talked about time and time again,
Yeah.
but we really don't spend time understanding that grace transforms, that grace covers, that grace says you don't have to carry this on your own anymore. Like grace
Hmm.
says you get to be free from this. And I think when a individual understands that they're under that, that can bring freedom. And that coupled with a spouse who then is also giving them that grace in the midst of what they're saying, because typically somebody who's dealing with that shame, they're either going to act out or they're going to retreat, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
because they're carrying that, and it's going to have an impact on that marriage. So again, it's coming back to like, how do you as a couple then, or as an individual, begin to extend that grace, right? To begin to move past what would be a normal thing for you of like how you would normally respond or react, and instead of reacting, like how do you respond? And I think part of it too is like if you're a spouse supporting someone in that is how do you have more of the mindset of like a gardener, like to come alongside and to help cultivate and help work with them and help love them through that. Shan
Hmm.
had that, and I had to have that gardener mindset. I could
Hmm.
have said, "Oh, I got a defective tree," right?
Yeah.
It's not doing this. It's dropping leaves everywhere. I don't like what it's doing. Doesn't look great.
Yeah.
It's not giving me the shade I thought I would get. So I had to be a gardener, right? I can't just dig it up and say I'm gonna go get another one.
Yeah.
Um, or I can absolutely be a consumer, and just consume what I need and be frustrated with what I'm not getting. But we're at a place now where I think if you're somebody who's navigating through that, it's grace. If it's understanding that in your identity, and then as a spouse coming alongside your spouse who's going through that, how do you extend that grace? How do you come alongside and support them? And then
Yeah.
recognizing, that, yeah, that is something that you get to heal one another. So there's probably a lot that your spouse has that they're going to be able to walk alongside and help you heal in some of these areas as well.
Yeah. No, that's good, man. That's gold. Grace is one of those things that sounds conceptually we feel like we get, right? But to
Yeah.
actually execute and receive and give that practically,
Yeah.
sometimes we can't really, we don't. I don't know that we can't. It's just that we don't. And sometimes it's just a choice,
Yeah.
really. It's just as
Yeah.
simple as that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, well,
Yeah.
I mean, I hear people distinguish between communication and connection. I've heard folks say, we can communicate in a marriage because, I can have her stop at the store on the way home and I can go pick this up and I can take the kids here, right? That's
Yeah.
communicating. So
Sure.
connection, when you let's talk about because you've referenced people maybe a little later in life after the kids, so empty nesters maybe. How do you re kind of kindle that connection if it was lost, or maybe it wasn't lost, it was just sort of overshadowed by some of the other obligations? How do you what do you see couples do to re kind of ignite that connection later in life, maybe midlife to later?
So you're thinking about you're talking about kind of like rekindling that spark, if you will, almost in essence, or that
Yeah,
connection.
and not just physically, but
Sure,
spiritually,
sure.
emotionally. Yeah,
Yeah.
connection.
Well, I mean, listen, if you want things to be good beneath the sheets, they got to be good above the sheets first, right? Like
Sure.
that's how it operates. That's how it works. And so, like, there's a lot you do, right? Like a guy wants sex in the evening. Well, that's going to start in the morning, right? Through
Sure.
intimacy and through connection, through those intentional moments. And so, I think if you've lost that fire, if you will, or that connection, I think you need to go back and see, like, what have you cultivated in your marriage? Like, we talk about this, like, man, like if you're a guy, like, what have you cultivated in your marriage? If you don't like what you see, how are you complicit in creating the
Hmm.
environment and conditions that you don't like? Like, how are you complicit in that?
Hmm.
So we tell couples that often, right? So you got to step back and recognize where I have not shown up, because you can desire to have a phenomenal marriage, right? And to have this great connection and be invested, but desire and devotion are very different things, right? They do, like, you can desire, but you got to be devoted to the intentional pursuit of your spouse. So I think you have to go back and look at, where have I got to take ownership. Where have I not been invested? Where have I had my affection and my attention placed somewhere else, that I've lost that, or I've taken for granted my spouse, right? I've
Right.
lost that ability to be able, I'm not pursuing, I'm not connecting as I know I should. And then we see our spouse who's maybe acting a certain way. They're a little frustrated, a little bitey with us. Well, guess what? Typically they are just reflecting back at us the ways that we have not probably engaged with them, pursued them. And so if marriage is a mirror, they're really reflecting back at us ways that we haven't really been maybe present and available. We can easily think it's about them. But if we pause, we got to look at ourselves and say, man, I have ownership for this. So if you want to shift that and increase your connection with your spouse and kind of bring that back to life, there has to be an intentionality in how you're pursuing one another. There has to be an intentionality in how you're moved towards your spouse. There has to be small daily moments, right, of connection where you're moving towards them. I think those are key pieces that you have to have in place. If you lose that, then you're going to begin to lose that connection. And what happens is it's over a period of time,
Right.
right? Because marriages don't die in the big moments. It's in the
Sure.
small things intentionally. And I think what happens is marriages die because it's not because we don't do certain things, it's because we neglect them, right? We
Right.
neglect them and we
Yeah.
put them on autopilot, and autopilot will kill a marriage. And so I think we have to re-examine. It's easy to say, well, he or she is not doing this. They're not doing that. They're not serving me this way. They're not showing up there. Okay. What are you doing?
Right.
How are you loving?
Well,
Because before God, that's what you're responsible
And
for.
I think guys too, to the analogy of like a poor diet. Like if a guy wants to lose 20 pounds, I mean, they get frustrated when they haven't done it in a week. Well, it took you way more than a week to gain that 20, right? You took a year of eating poorly, and then
Right?
you walk around the block 5 times and you're going to get back to your fighting weight. I got news for guys too in marriage. Like
Yeah.
it took you this long to get this disconnection, right? To drive a wedge, to separate
Yeah.
between, drive the
Yeah.
separation. It's not going to be overnight that you took out the
Yeah.
trash and centered flowers that it's all going to go away. And I think that is a problem because guys, again, we
Yeah.
expect us to,
Yeah.
we're clicking on all cylinders, and then a week later nothing's changed, and you're like, well, forget it, because
Yeah.
she's not having any part of it. Well,
That's
she
a
got there.
100% true. Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's 100% true. Like, there's a wall built, right? And we're on the other side of the wall. Like, what is going on? Well, like, bro, like, hang the mirror on that wall and see what's actually happening here, right?
Yeah.
And so we expect 2 weeks of good behavior. Like, well, what's going on? I was great for 2 weeks. Why is she not responding? Why is she not acting this way? Why hasn't
Yeah.
she changed? Bro, she is not responding. Like, you do your part, what God has asked of you.
Yeah.
God will bring the change. God will do his part. You just keep showing up, right?
Yeah.
And I
For
did that
sure.
with Shannan. But and you can't and as a guy, you can't take that wall down.
Yeah.
They have to. You can't make them remove a brick. They have to do that. And it's going to be about how you love, how you lead, how you pursue, how you engage, how you show up and do the hard things. Because as men, right, we
Yeah.
are meant to do hard things. We're
Hmm.
meant to do hard things.
Yeah. Well, so I also want to know if you guys work with any sort of pre-marriage scenarios, like if you do a pre-marriage boot camp, or obviously you really can't because if it's an overnight thing, it'd be hard to, I mean, unless you just had separate quarters for everybody. But have you given any thought to that, or do you do anything that helps prepare couples before it becomes a grease fire in the kitchen?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? I know that
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
you're good.
connectivity was a little off, but
Yep, you're good.
okay. Um,
Did you hear my question?
Our team does premarital. Yeah, yeah, we used to do
Okay.
premarital because we loved because what we started seeing is that we need to be able to catch right upstream what we're seeing downstream. And the
Yep.
problem is, I think sometimes people work with marriages or even churches, they do really well catching it downstream, but not
Hmm.
upstream. And
Hmm.
that upstream is that premarital, right? Which I think is
Right.
incredibly essential. So we're actually in the middle. This year, we'll be releasing a course for premarital, and some of our team works on that. But we don't have per se a boot camp on that, but we have thought about that because we believe it's that essential for these marriages to begin hopefully with a right foundation, because
Yeah.
that's what we're beginning to see is they understand we're bringing stuff into it, just don't know what that is or what it looks like,
Yeah.
and they just don't have a foundation good foundation, at least where to start from.
Right. Right. That's good. No, I had a feeling that was on your radar. Okay. Be transparent with me real quick because you and your wife are you've overcome a lot. You're now teaching and quote unquote the experts with the people that you're working with, right? I mean, God has put you in this place for a time such as this. What is something that you guys are working on your own, like together? Like what's the thing in the Shannan and Javier season? Like what's the thing right now that you guys are trying to live the example that you're teaching?
Yeah, here's what's interesting is like we always teach from a place of like, hey, we're going through this too. We're walking through it as well. Like I don't always say the right thing. I don't always unpack it the right way. Shannan. So right now we're actually, I think almost every 10 years you evolve kind of a new version of yourself. And right now we're kind of at a tipping point in our ministry. So there's a lot sometimes of contention about what needs to happen and what's next. And so we're actually finding ourselves back to like a similar season from the beginning of our marriage, where she has found herself at times responding in a way that reminds her of how it was in the first 5 years, because she's allowing the frustration of a situation to dictate then how she's responding to me, right? It's not really anything that I did; it's more the situation and responding to that. And so for her, she would tell you it's how she's actually responding in her tone and her language, right? I wouldn't say language like in bad language, but just
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
words that I'm using. And for me, I think the season of life that I'm in, and it's been tough for me, is like how do I love her well through where she's at, but at the same time, how do I care for myself, being in my 50s and, life progressing, a different season of how, of what I get to invest into others and into my children, into my son-in-law and all of that. So for me, the challenge right now is it's a push just to be, I feel like I need to keep pushing, 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 and I'll seek that validation. And if I don't hear it from her, I get frustrated. Not validation, but the affirmation, right? I'm a words of affirmation person.
Right. Me too.
Um, and and she's kind of coming back to that place to recognize, hey, I've kind of missed that a little bit. And so for me, I'm having to also recognize for her that she's going through a lot of transitions, physically and in her body as well. That how do I love her through that? And I don't always do it well because it's not selfishness, because I'm really aware of like how I'm serving her, but it is like I've got to do these things. I got to provide security. I got to advance the ministry. I got to do all these things that are good, and I can find myself getting back to that becomes, if anything, almost the idol. right? And the marriage can even become the idol also, as opposed to me being, no, I got to go to God, go to God, go to God. So I am right now navigating like not trying to control things on my own, because then that impacts our marriage and how we're connecting and relating to one another.
Wow. I appreciate the transparency because, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I don't know anybody that hasn't gone through a version of that or isn't currently, and that's good. I mean, that's a good take on a situation because we need to press in. And I think you said it earlier. You mentioned first love, and I'm talking about our love
Yeah.
for Jesus. If we can get back to our first, the moment that we were hungry for God and press into that, then he says what? Seek me first the kingdom, right? Seek first the kingdom
Yeah.
and all things will be added to you. So your
Yeah.
marriage will fall into place, your work will fall into place, your relationships, like your finances, if you seek him first. And so it sounds like to me you
Yeah.
guys are both in that season of digging in and pressing in to what God's trying to say to you guys. But I appreciate you being transparent about that. All right. Well, tell us where to get some resources and kind of about the book title is kind of interesting. If I was looking at the right one, is it Confessions of a Terrible Wife? Is that what that book is?
Oh, there's so yeah, Confessions of a Terrible Wife.
Yeah,
So kind of outlines the first 5 years. So it's kind of like her story, her piece, and it's my piece of how I navigated that as a husband in response to where she was at.
cool.
And that's I think what's missing sometimes, that people, hey, I read that, but like, how did he respond? Like, how did he navigate that
Yeah,
season, right? I can relate to that. And so it's kind of like based around that.
that's cool.
Then we have some courses coming out in this year. We got 7 boot camps. So, and the best way, and this is what Shannon always does. So, I'm not always the greatest at this, but the best way is honestly, if you're on here and you're listening and you have access to Instagram, social media, that's a great way to be able to follow us, because we have the links on there for boot camps. All our content resources kind of come through there. Plus, what we're doing on a consistent basis, putting out there. But yeah, the website, which is in the process going to be about revamped here in the next couple of weeks, but it's at 247 Marriage. Those are probably two of the best ways. And then our boot camp schedule is coming out here. She's already releasing dates, but all the dates will be coming out here within the next week or so. And that's a great way. And those boot camps are not just if you're a marriage man, we're in the middle of infidelity, or we're really broken. Couples come there just to be refreshed, right? To reset. And we have couples who've been married a year to 50 years in the same room. And here's the thing, regardless of the season you're in marriage, there is room to work on things. There is things that you do need to actually sharpen and refresh on and bring some healing into. And so that's really kind of geared that way. And they're going to be all over. They're going to be a lot in the West. There'll be some in the kind of Midwest of the South as well. And so that's a great way to be able to connect as well.
That's good. That's good. That's how we connected, was on Instagram, and I appreciate your team helping me. You guys got a very responsive team, which I appreciate. All right, before I let you go, and this one just hit me, and I didn't plan
Sure.
on this one, and we'll close with this, but how about some advice? Let's do an advice session for the guys listening. What is your advice? You're sitting down and a couple sits in front of you and your wife, and they say, we just grew apart.
Hmm.
Because I think I mean, I don't know. Maybe I've felt that at times, maybe not, but I think that might be just kind of a cop out, and maybe I'm wrong. You correct me. You're the expert. But they sit in front of you and say, I think, we just grew apart. They're just different now. They're not who I married. Give me some
Yeah.
advice if I'm saying that
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. I would. So we do hear that often, and at times we hear like, "Hey, we've grown apart," or we fallen out of love,
Yeah.
right? When they say we've fallen out of love, and I tend to tell people like, "Well, no, you actually fell out of repentance, because you're not willing to repent from the things that maybe you have navigated or you brought into it, and to own that." So it's easier to say we've just fallen out of love,
Yeah.
right, than to take the ownership of it. When people say we've grown apart, I think we have to we go back and say, we have them unpack a little bit about, tell
Yeah.
me how you arrived to where you're at. Because here's the thing, couples always come and say, I don't know how we got here. But I can tell you that if I peel back the layers and I really look through everything that you have been doing, your intentions, if I sat on your counter in your house and I watched your daily interactions with one another, how you communicate, how you move towards each other, how you aim yourselves literally physically at one another when you're communicating, all those things will tell me a lot how you arrive to where you're at. Right? Life happens. If we get busy, we understand that. And so we grow disconnected because we aren't intentional in pursuing first a God and then one another. And so we've allowed other priorities come in. We've allowed other things to come in to distract us. And that's the thing I would tell them, is that the enemy doesn't care that you're even married. What he
Mm.
does care is that you understand your purpose of your marriage, which is to reflect an image of God. And his goal is to get you distracted, to get you disconnected, because then you are not a threat, right? If he can get you distracted and disconnected, then that power you have as a couple with God in the middle is pretty incredible. And it's going to impact the lives, right, of your children and generations, like we mentioned. So couples who come to that place, I would say it's got to be full ownership on both sides. You tell me, how did you arrive here?
Yeah.
Right? What happened in your daily connection with God? What happened in your pursuit of one another? Tell me about your daily routines. Tell me about how you're engaging with one another.
Reverse
Are you praying
engineer. Yeah.
together?
Reverse engineer
Yeah,
right back into that. Yeah.
yeah. You have to, because you have to be able to say. So what I hear you saying is, your marriage. You have not been investing in your marriage. You have not come to a place where that has been next to God, where you invest your time. Right? It isn't, because you we can arrive at a place, hey, we feel a little disconnected, but to be at a place where, like, man, we don't think we can continue anymore. You didn't start that way. You didn't start day one that way, you
Right.
know. And couples,
Yeah.
just because life happens, they grow in that disconnect because of a lack of intentionality,
Yeah.
um and pursuit of one another. And if you have that mindset, and it's a mindset shift, that's how I
Yeah.
have to pursue this consistently.
Yeah, and I appreciate doing that. And that was kind of one of those. I wish I'd have thrown that in and thought about that earlier, but I'm glad we did. I mean, we needed that last kind of shot in the arm advice. But I don't know about you, but I kind of wish I had a home video of the first year before, or the year before we were married, or that first year married, like when we were courting, right? I wish I had a home movie of that year of dating before we got
Yeah,
married.
yeah,
Because I bet you we wouldn't recognize that guy.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it, guys.
yeah.
Keep dating your wife. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's the thing. If you go back, and we do this in our boot camps, we take couples back to where they started, right? To remember how they
Good.
began. And then how do you arrive to where you're at? And it's so easy to say, yes, them, my spouse, this, that, life. Like, you can blame anybody you want,
Yeah.
but that is nothing but absolute excuses
Yeah.
and BS. I'm sorry. Like, to
Yeah.
be able to point at someone else, like, you've got to take ownership. You've got to do the hard work.
Yeah.
That's why we say 24/7 marriage. You got to invest in it 24/7.
Yeah.
Right. And like I said earlier, the purpose of your marriage is God. That's greater than anything you will ever face. And the purpose of marriage must be greater than anything you'll ever encounter and ever face.
Yeah.
And so having this mindset, hey, we believe in each other. We want the best for each other. We're going to pursue one another. Because at the end of this, like, there we stand before one another, right? When
Yeah.
all the kids are gone. And so this is the
That's right.
place that have to come to be able to say, hey, this is the woman that God has given me. This is a man that God has given me. And I'm called to come alongside, and I'm called to love them, to believe in them, to cherish them. And no matter what, that's what I'm going for. Right.
That's right.
And so
That's right.
building a marriage is not based upon a feeling, right? It's,
It's
it's,
good.
it's commitment. It's a covenant. And so
Yeah.
I know God can do some pretty powerful things through that. But we have to be
Yeah.
reminded of that daily.
Yeah. And one of the biggest wedges the enemy will use is blame. So if I
Absolutely.
can
Yep.
convince myself that it's the other person's fault, then I've won. And the enemy would love nothing more than that. So anyway,
That's
this has
it.
been one of my more favorite conversations I've had in a while.
Awesome.
So I really do appreciate
Likewise.
it. Audience, he has been Javier Labrador. There's
Yes.
my there's my Labrador. I got it. I got
Labrador.
it. I'm pretty
Labrador.
good. No,
Thank
he's
you, John.
been,
Appreciate it so
yeah.
much.
Hey, he's been Javier Labrador. We've been last in line. Be blessed.